Welcome in. Week 0 is over. So there is, a couple storylines that we'll talk about probably throughout the week as we give predictions for the upcoming week. But in general, most of our recaps are going to be a little bit longer. We're going to talk about a few other things in the coming weeks. But this week, there was really one main storyline, and that was obviously Nebraska. And Nebraska lost to Northwestern in Ireland over the weekend. And now everyone's talking about Scott Frost, his job, what's going to happen there. Nobody's really talking about Northwestern, getting a big win. It's just all about Nebraska and Scott Frost. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we go forward today. Later on in the week, I'll give my best bets, my predictions for the week for week number 1. So let's start with Nebraska first off. So they lost this game 31-28 in Dublin, and it was a really interesting game for a few reasons. So first of all, Nebraska comes out. They got Mark Whipple as their offense coordinator. You got Casey Thompson as your quarterback, and you kind of want to see an offense that has improved and an offense that's a little more explosive than it has been under Scott Frost, and for the most part, it was. I mean, right, if you look through the numbers and you look at kind of what they did, especially at the beginning of this game, Casey Thompson played really, really well. And they threw the ball extremely well. They were able to connect on some big plays downfield. Issues arose, though. And those issues have continued at Nebraska. Turnovers have been a big problem. But if you go back and watch the game, it had everything to do with drops. 2 drops led to both interceptions for Casey Thompson. They had another turnover as well, so they lost the turnover battle 3-1, which unfortunately has kind of been a staple for Scott Frost at Nebraska. And then, of course, special teams, which have been a huge issue for him as well. So let's kind of go through this game a little bit. So overall, Casey Thompson played well. Ryan Helinski on the other side, the quarterback for Northwestern, showed amazing improvement. He was a guy who I thought was going to be pretty good when he signed with South Carolina and played there, but things didn't really work out for him. And he transferred to Northwestern and then had a rough year last year. So you don't really know what to expect. But for him to come out, 27 of 38, 314 yards and 2 touchdowns, he was really, really efficient. It felt like in that first half, he was just able to drive Northwestern up and down the field. He was connecting on third down. It just was really interesting to watch, and I don't think it was something that many people expected out of Ryan Helinski in this game. So where we were at in this matchup, and I think, there's been a lot of talk about this onside kick, right? And I'll get to that in a second. But third quarter, Nebraska takes the lead. 21-17. It looks like Nebraska has finally turned the corner a little bit. It kind of been back and forth throughout, but that touchdown really made it seem like, okay, Nebraska might have control of this game. They just need to stop. Well, they forced a fumble after giving up an explosive play. They went down the field and scored a touchdown to go up 28-17. Things are looking great. That forced fumble was huge. The touchdown to answer it was massive. And now you're sitting there in the third quarter, an 11-point lead. Everything looks great. And then they decide to come out and kick an onside kick. Up 11 in the third quarter. I know you want to go out and put the game away. I know that's the goal, right? If you get the onside kick and score a touchdown, you feel like, okay, this game's over. You've been able to get a win, but I feel like they really need to force this Northwestern team to drive 80 yards. Instead of giving them the short field, Northwestern scored within, I think, like 2 minutes to push the game to 28-24, complete momentum swing. Like from that point on, Northwestern was in basically control of this game. Big part of it was the turnovers, but it just felt like from that moment on that they were going to win this football game. So, you go to the next drive, Casey Thompson throws a strike to the receiver. Ball goes right through the receiver's hands, right to the cornerback, who's in great press coverage, and it just falls right into his hands. And they return it for a little ways. They score a touchdown, 31-28, with 11 minutes to go in the game. You drive down a little bit later, a minute 30 left in the game. Casey Thompson throws it to another receiver, hits his hands, it's picked off, and the rest is history. So it's just kind of this snowball effect from that onside kick that led to this loss. But there were so many other things throughout the game that were just really alarming. This team was awesome defensively last year. Like really, really good, underrated good for how bad their offense was. They were put in terrible positions a year ago and still were really good. And they were the staple of this team a season ago. And then they come into this game and give up over 500 yards and 31 points to Northwestern. How bad is that? Well, Northwestern averaged 16.6 points per game last year, which was 125th out of 130 teams in the entire country. That's just not good enough. That's just not good enough at all for this defense. It felt like they were gassed by the end of the game, but it was more than that. It was Northwestern just being able to pretty much do whatever they wanted, throwing the football, running the football. They really did a lot of things well, and it felt like they were in total control the whole game, that their offense was just in control of everything they needed to do. They were able to convert third downs. They were able to drive the football. They were able to run the ball, which I'll get to in a second on the Nebraska side. But 314 yards passing, 214 yards rushing. They only had one turnover. They won time of possession 34-25. Well, 34-26, I guess. And so I just look at all that and I go, everyone's talking about Nebraska, but they're kind of missing the fact that Northwestern really outplayed them. And the turnovers were a huge part of that. But in general, the Wildcats were the better team on the day. So now we all sit here and we go, okay, well, this was super unexpected. Well, was it? I mean, Pat Fitzgerald, they had a really bad year last year, Northwestern did, but Pat Fitzgerald, it's every other year with him. He's able to get that team back and get them focused. It seems like every other year. This year just felt like it might not be the year for them to be able to do that, and they did. So he's a great coach. He went out there. He outcoached Scott Frost on the day. They were able to get the win, and now that's led to all these question marks about Scott Frost. And so I'm just going to throw out some numbers that I find extremely interesting. So since 2018, they're 4-8, 5-7, 3-5, 3-9. So not good record-wise. Then you move to the side of the ball that he pretty much made his hay. And the area where everyone thought, okay, when he goes to Nebraska, Nebraska is going to be able to score points. Well, he's never had a top 50 offense during his time at Nebraska, and they've only been inside the top 70 one time. That's crazy. That is just absurdly bad. And that's why they brought in Mark Whipple, right? You bring him in, and now the offense is fixed. Scott Frost, he's hands off on the offense now. It's all about Mark Whipple. And while they were okay, I wouldn't say they were amazing. And the area where they still can't do anything is running the football. You lose Adrian Martinez from a year ago, who was a running quarterback. You bring in Casey Thompson, who's more of a pocket passer. That's fine, but you still got to find a way to run the ball. This team ran for 110 yards, and they averaged less than 4 yards per carry. Whereas on the other side, Northwestern averaged 4.5 yards per carry and put up 214 yards rushing. They were the more physical team. And so now we're all just sitting here and going, okay, so what does this mean for Scott Frost? Well, how about this stat? Scott Frost is now 15-30 at Nebraska. And I read this on Twitter. I'm sure everyone has maybe heard of it or heard some inkling about it. But 15-30, Bo Pelini was fired after going 67-27 during his time at Nebraska. If Scott Frost wins his next 50 games in a row, he would still have a worse record at Nebraska than Bo Pelini did. 50 games in a row. That's essentially what, 3 national championships is what he'd have to do to even come close to Bo, and he still would have a worse record at Nebraska. That's a problem. I do think that it is game 1, so I also want to caution people because I still think Nebraska has a shot at making a bowl this year. They could go 6-6, but is that enough? Is that enough to overcome what we've seen, during these past, 4 year 5 for Scott Frost? Is that enough? I don't know that I can answer that, but what I can say is I think Nebraska is a better program than that. I think that Nebraska has a tradition. I think they have a recruiting pipeline. I think they have the resources, especially being in the Big Ten, to be better than they have been. And so if that means they need to go a different direction at the head coaching spot, then I think they do. And I think it's one of those things where I think they need an injection of new life. And a lot of times with head coaches, when those first 3 years don't work out, when 4 years don't work out, it becomes one of those things where what can go wrong does go wrong. And I think that's what has happened to Scott Frost at Nebraska. So I do think it's probably time to move on, whether they go 6-6 or not. If they win the Big Ten, I'll definitely change my tune, but I don't see that happening after what we just saw in week 0 of the football season. So that's it for kind of a little bit of a recap of that game. Probably the biggest storyline of the week. Felt like talking about it and just kind of, questioning some things. College football is a game where I think you can question a lot of things and talk about the future and talk about the history of the sport. And I really feel like this is an important time for that Nebraska football program that has been, a very storied program throughout their history. So thanks for joining. Later on in the week, we will talk a little bit about predictions for week 1 of the college football season. But thanks for tuning in.